Reyes, confirm visual. Is she armed? Lieutenant CMDR Talia Reyes leaned closer to the grainy IR feed. The woman on the screen knelt in the center of the room, hands on her head, shoulders shaking. No weapon, no vest. Just a loose dark abaya and a blur of heat. Negative weapon ID, Reyes said. She's compliant. Mission command, this is Raven 1. The team leader's voice crackled through the headset, breathless. She keeps inching toward the doorway. We can't see her hands anymore. Request guidance. On the feed, the woman shifted again, almost imperceptibly, knees edging toward a shadow at the wall. Over Reyes's shoulder, the remote flag officer from headquarters cut in, voice cool and distant. Raven 1, ROE stands. No engagement on unarmed female. You will not fire unless you have a confirmed weapon. That's directive. Reyes felt her throat tighten. Sir, pattern matches Vale's last 3 ambushes, she said. If she reaches that corner, they're dead. Not your call tonight, Lieutenant Commander, the general replied. We're not giving anyone footage of you shooting a woman on her knees. Ma'am, Raven 1 whispered, lower now, just for her. If we don't move or shoot, we're boxed. Say again, what are we doing? Reyes stared at the woman's shifting outline, at the heat signatures of the 4 men who had trusted her doctrine enough to come here. Her thumb hovered over the transmit key that would break the stalemate. Follow the rulebook, she wrote, or burn it in front of everyone watching. She exhaled once. Raven 1, on my command. 36 hours earlier, Al-Sara Training Complex, UTC+3. No firing sim rounds at detainees once they are cuffed and searched. The plastic chair dug into lilting CMDR, Talia Reyes's shoulders as she shifted, testing the flex cuffs behind her back. The tape over her mouth tasted like cardboard and sweat. On the other side of the dim room, 4 silhouettes fanned out, rifles up. Blue training bolts locked in each M4A1 marked them as harmless, but their muzzles still tracked her head with nervous precision. Detainee secured, one of them called. Young, male, American accent overlaid with fatigue. Raven 1, the team lead. Hands bound, compliant, standing by for extract. Reyes let her eyelids droop, counting heartbeat by heartbeat. The overhead fluorescent hummed. Somewhere in the Mout site, another class fired. Rifle pops muffled by concrete. Talc from training smoke clung to the air, dry on her tongue. This was the part where they always relaxed. Through the thin wall, she heard the lane controller speaking under his breath into a handheld. White cell, Raven in room 3. Script says no further resistance from detainee. Script. She rolled her wrist minutely, feeling the give of plastic under sweat. These cuffs had been pulled too fast, the locking tooth not fully engaged. She knew because she'd taught the block on them, and because she had written the original note in the manual. Improperly secured flex cuffs are an invitation. The note no longer appeared in the printed handbook. The team leader stepped close enough that she could smell the cordite ghost still clinging to his plate carrier from earlier runs. He pressed the training pistol, bright blue MK-25, against her temple. The gesture was theatrical, meant for the helmet cams. Ma'am, he muttered, so the microphones wouldn't pick it up. If you can hear me, this is going to look worse than it is. We're just ticking boxes. She nearly laughed behind the tape. Tick your boxes, she thought. See where they get you. Somewhere in the rafters, a camera whirred as it adjusted. Caldern Briggs would be watching from the control room, eyes on every angle. She pictured his jaw tightening, the way it always did when she deviated from the training script. 3 more heartbeats. That was all she needed. Reyes inhaled through her nose, shifted her weight forward as if to adjust her knees, and then exploded sideways. The chair crashed to the floor, her shoulder taking the impact. Pain flared down her arm, but the flex cuffs snapped as she'd calculated they would. "Contact!" someone yelled. She rolled behind the team leader's legs, sweeping his ankle with both feet. He dropped, rifle clattering. Her shoulders screamed as she wrenched her hands forward, plastic biting skin, but now in front of her instead of behind. She tore the tape from her mouth with her teeth, snatched his MK-25, and rose in one smooth motion behind him. The pistol's cold training barrel pressed against the gap in his helmet, where skull met spine. "Freeze," she said, voice clear enough for every microphone. The room locked. 3 rifles swung toward her, but hesitation stalled them. The ROE burned in their heads. No firing at detainees once cuffed and searched. She had been cuffed. She had been searched. Now she held their team leader at simulated gunpoint. "You don't have a shot," she said calmly. "You gave it away when you decided I was a prop." One of the younger operators shifted his weight, trying to edge for a better angle. She saw the calculation, leg shot maybe, if he could justify it in the debrief. "Don't," she warned. "You're inside 3 meters, narrow hallway, hostage between you and threat. You pull the trigger, you'll put a round through his spine before it stops in me. That's in your manual. Page 63. The nearest operator blinked. You read the handbook?" Reyes smiled without humor. "I wrote the handbook." Silence pressed in. Sweat trickled down the side of her neck, caught in her collar. The fluorescent buzz seemed louder than the men's breathing. She leaned nearer to Raven One's ear. He went rigid, more from embarrassment than fear. She knew the type. Competent. Smart. Taught to trust the printed rules more than the instincts behind them. "You skipped the secondary search," she said, voice low but still audible on the recording. "You didn't check the cuffs. You all pointed guns at my head and decided I'd stopped being a problem. That's 3 fatal errors before you ever hit a real door." Her thumb flicked the training pistol's decocker by muscle memory. It didn't matter that it wasn't live. The sound made them flinch. "White Cell, this is Reyes," she called toward the ceiling mic. "Index, terminate lane. All players freeze." A tone sounded overhead. Red lights snapped on near the ceiling, washing the room in color. The operators slumped, the tension in their shoulders collapsing into frustration. The door burst open. Coldorn Briggs strode in, coveralls immaculate, headset hanging around his neck like a warning. He took in the scene. His carefully scripted lane overturned, his star team on their knees. Reyes standing free with a training gun in her hand. His jaw did exactly what she'd pictured. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, voice very level. "A word. Now." Reyes handed the pistol back to the stunned team leader. Flex cuffs dangling split from her wrists like white flags that had already been torn. As she followed Briggs out into the harsh-lit corridor, the fluorescent hum gave way to the distant calls of other instructors, other lanes ticking along on schedule. Behind her, Raven stood in a silent half-circle, staring at the woman they'd been told was just a role player. None of them knew yet that the rulebook they loved to quote had just turned on them. Through the mouth of the person who had written it. And Briggs, she knew, was about to ask why. All training and instruction will reinforce current operational guidance. Unarmed, kneeling detainees are to be treated as non-threats unless a weapon is positively identified. No exceptions taught. The briefing room lights dimmed, and the first helmet cam angle filled the screen. Jerky footage of a dim concrete room, a chair, and a woman in a headscarf bound to it. Reyes watched herself from Raven One's perspective, faceless behind tape and flex cuffs. Colin Briggs stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a silent block in a line of fluorescent glare. The course director, a compact commander named Hallie, clicked a remote in his hand like a trigger he couldn't wait to pull. Raven sat in the first row, shoulders hunched, still in damp undershirts from the lane. "All right," Hallie said. "Standard AAR. We'll walk it from entry to index. Call out missteps. Learn from them. No one's getting crucified." Reyes could feel Raven's eyes on the back of her head. She remained standing along the side wall, the position usually reserved for a visiting observer, not the woman who had just humiliated the class. On screen, Raven flowed, through the door, muzzles up, clearing angles. Reyes noted small things: a foot too close to the threshold, a rifle that dipped fractionally when the first room looked empty. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. Then the camera caught her in the chair. Bound. Still. "Freeze that," Reyes said. Hallie's thumb hovered, but he pressed the button. The image paused. Reyes with tape over her mouth, head tilted, 4 rifles converging. "Detainee posture?" she asked. "Compliant," Malik answered from the front row, clipped. "Perceived threat level?" "Low," Raven 1 said. His jaw was tight, but his voice stayed steady. "Hands bound, seated, no visible weapon." "ROE?" she asked. Hallie cut in before anyone else could. "Same as real-world deployment. Once detainee is searched and secured, force minimized, no pointing weapons unless necessary, no engagement without PID on a weapon." Reyes let the silence sit a moment. Then, "And if she moves?" A beat. No one answered. Hallie glanced at Briggs, then back at her. "We teach you to control the scene. You move the detainee, not the other way around." She stepped closer to the screen, the frozen image throwing a pale ghost of herself over her features. "Play." The footage rolled. They saw the casual shift in posture, the tiny slack in the flex cuffs, the way the team leader stepped close and went theatrical with his pistol. They watched her blow apart their script, chair over, cuffs snapping, weapons seized. Hallie paused it again when she had the pistol to Raven 1's neck. "Here's where you lost the lane," he said. "I didn't lose the lane," Reyes said. "They did the moment they decided a bound woman stopped being a threat. They made 3 errors you're not even naming." Hallie's lips compressed. "With respect, Lieutenant Commander, this is training, not theater." She turned to face him fully. "That's exactly what it becomes when we pretend the world looks like our PowerPoints." Briggs uncrossed his arms, voice finally entering the room. "We are not here to debate the ROE, Reyes. This course teaches what's been approved by hire. We don't freelance." Something hot moved under her sternum. She kept her tone even. "I'm not freelancing. I'm asking why we're ignoring lessons learned." She stepped to the podium and flipped open the dog-eared handbook lying there, the official Urban Operations Guide with her name buried in the acknowledgments. The pages felt unfamiliar under her fingers, rearranged phrases wearing her voice like a mask. "Section 4, Detainee Handling," she said, scanning. Subparagraph C, once surrender is verified and search completed, any further movement by detainee is to be treated as non-hostile unless a weapon is identified. She looked up. "Who wrote that?" Hallie shrugged. "Doctrine Working Group. Legal Review. You were on the distro." "I wrote something different," she said quietly. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded, worn stack of pages, edges softened by years. The earlier draft, her draft, still bore red pen marks and a blacked-out logo from a command that no longer existed. "Same section," she said, laying it beside the handbook. Once surrender is verified and search completed, any movement toward cover, blind zones, or concealed hands will be treated as hostile intent. Her finger underlined the next part. Shoot her if she moves toward cover after surrender. The words silenced the room more thoroughly than any tone over the intercom. Malik shifted in his chair, eyes going to Briggs, then to her. Raven 1 stared at the page as if it might rewrite itself while he watched. Briggs stepped forward, picking up the draft with 2 fingers. His expression didn't change, but his voice cooled by degrees. This language didn't survive Legal and Public Affairs Review, Lieutenant Commander. You know why. Because it sounds bad on the news, Reyes said. Because it's vague, he countered. Because someone will interpret it as license to shoot every unarmed woman who flinches. We can't give that to 19-year-olds in a hallway at 3 a.m. Reyes held his gaze. If you don't tell them what a trap looks like, they'll step in it anyway. Only difference is whether they blame themselves or the book when they're the last ones standing. Hallie cleared his throat. We're not revising ROE in a classroom. The directive is what it is. You will instruct to the handbook, not to a ghost version only you carry around. That stung more than she expected. Ghost version. That's what it had become, hadn't it? The rule she'd written after watching a teammate bleed out beside a surrendered bomber. Briggs folded the draft, thumb tracing the crease. For a second she thought he might keep it. Instead, he set it back on the podium, closer to her. You made your point, he said. You also undermined the lane, humiliated a deploying team, and violated the ROE we are obligated to teach. This is your only free swing, Reyes. Next time you want to prove a doctrinal point, you do it in a working group, not with someone's helmet cam rolling. Raven stared straight ahead, faces carefully blank. Reyes picked up the draft pages, feeling the thin weight of them in her hand. Understood, sir, she said. But as she left the room, the handbook stayed on the podium, its sanitized lines staring up at Hallie. The older pages, her pages, went into her pocket again, pressed against her leg like contraband. If the official rulebook had been edited to fit a narrative, then whatever was coming for Raven would not. And she needed to know who else had decided that shooting a woman who moved toward cover was a line they wouldn't print, even if it was the only thing that might keep her students alive. Units were forbidden to engage apparent non-combatants, especially women and children, unless a weapon was clearly identified. Surrendering, kneeling figures were to be treated as protected persons. The SIGAC cell was a windowless rectangle buried 2 floors under the operations center, lit by rows of monitors and the sickly wash of overhead LEDs. On the far wall, maps overlapped like scales, grids, lines of advance, tiny red icons where things had gone wrong. Reyes stepped inside and let the door hiss shut behind her. The air smelled of stale coffee, dry paper, and overheated electronics. A junior intel officer looked up from his screen. His name tape read, Miller. His eyes read already tired of this deployment. Ma'am? He asked. You lost? Exactly where I meant to be, Reyes said. I need full reports on any raids in the last 6 months where a kneeling female was present at the breach or first room. Miller's eyebrows went up. That's specific. At least 3 teams have eaten it on that pattern, Reyes said. I want to see the tapes. He swiveled his chair toward a glassed-in office where a major sat hunched over a keyboard, headset on one ear. Major Khan runs the review queue. Khan glanced up, clocked Reyes's rank, and removed the headset with deliberate slowness. Lieutenant Commander, we support mission analysis, not doctrinal crusades. What's this about? Reyes stepped closer, keeping her voice level. It's about making sure we don't send another team out with a blind spot we built for them. I need to confirm a pattern. Khan studied her for a beat, then sighed. You instructors always want to turn our dead into slides. They're already slides, Reyes said quietly, flicking her chin toward the screens. I'm just trying to read them properly. He hesitated just long enough to show he cared, then typed a series of queries. Lines of text rolled past. Dates, unit designators, short summaries. He clicked on one. Here, Khan said. 3 months ago. Night raid, different battalion. Mout environment. Kneeling female in the first room. The main monitor filled with drone footage, a top-down view from an MQ-9, monochrome city blocks in ghostly contrast. Time code ran in the corner in Zulu. She watched the team flow down an alley, stack on a door, breach in a flash of white. Khan switched to helmet cam. Now she was inside the stack, riding behind someone else's eyes as the door blew inward. Dust, shouting, beams of white light. A woman appeared in the doorway ahead, dropping to her knees, hands raised. No weapon, no vest visible. Freeze, Reyes said. Khan paused the frame. ROE at the time? She asked. Same as now, Miller answered from his desk. No engagement on unarmed kneeling subjects. Directive from higher. Reyes watched the frozen operator's muzzle dip a fraction as he processed that. Then she closed her eyes for a heartbeat, bracing. Roll it. The woman shuffled forward on her knees, inching toward a side room just out of frame. The point man kept yelling in a language she knew he barely spoke, trying to sound authoritative and calm at the same time. On the left edge of the view, something flashed in the dark of the side doorway. Just a flicker, maybe a reflection, maybe a barrel. The recording strobed white as a device went off, sound cutting out in a digital squeal. When the picture recovered, the camera lay on its side. All she could see was a jumble of limbs and boots, dust drifting through the cone of a weapon light. Someone screamed a name until their voice broke. 2 KIA, 1 urgent surgical, Khan said quietly. We put it down as IED initiated by unknown trigger. Could have been her. Could have been someone in the next room. Reyes felt her throat close, memory colliding with the pixels on the screen. Another hallway, another kneeling woman, another blast. Her friend's hand jerking once in hers, then not at all. How many like this? She asked. Khan didn't answer immediately. He ran more searches, another video, another kneeling figure, different building, different country code on the screen, same choreography. Kneel, inch toward a blind corner. Team hesitates, bound by words on paper written far from concrete and blood. Reyes forced herself to watch 3 full incidents. Each ended in chaos, bodies, medevac calls. The system redacted the worst details, but it didn't need gore to make its point. This isn't random, she said. Someone is studying our ROE and using it against us. That's what insurgents do, Khan said. They adapt. I'm not talking about insurgents, Reyes said. I'm talking about a single mind copying the same play 3 times. Same gender, same posture, same timing to the blast. This is structured. Miller turned in his chair, frowning. We did get some chatter about a female bomb maker a while back. Rumor mill called her something. He snapped his fingers, searching his memory. Veil, because no one had a face shot. Just silhouettes and aftermaths. Khan's expression tightened. That code name isn't in any releasable product yet, Lieutenant Commander. You didn't hear it from us. Too late. The word was already slotting into place in Reyes's mental map. a label on the pattern she'd been feeling for days. Veil. Someone out there had read the same handbook she had, and where headquarters had softened it, this woman had sharpened it into a weapon. Reyes stepped closer to the map wall, tracing with her eyes. One red icon, then another, then a third, forming a loose triangle around their own area of operations. Zoom. Out, she said. Miller did, pulling back to a wider operational picture. The 3 incidents speckled the screen, slowly blinking as if in warning. Now overlay last week's signals hits, Reyes said. Khan hesitated, then keyed in the command. New markers sprang up. Intercepts, fleeting pings of a likely device maker moving through safe houses. One cluster pulsed uncomfortably close to Al-Sara's city. There, Reyes said. That's not rumor anymore. That's proximity. Khan exhaled through his nose. We're still building a case. No tasking yet. And before you ask, no, you are not taking this into a classroom. Reyes kept her eyes on the map. I'm not taking it into a classroom. She thought of Raven in the briefing room, of the deleted line in her doctrine, of the way Malik had said compliant like a spell that protected him. I'm taking it into a planning cell, she said, because when Hire finally decides to go after Vale, they're going to send the people I just broke in training. And if the rulebook stays the way it is, she'll break them for real. Behind her, a printer kicked on, spitting out a fresh intel summary. On the header, half-formed but unmistakable, was a name, Vale. The hunt, Reyes realized, had just stopped being theoretical. Current theater guidance stands, no engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without positive weapon identification. Lethal force authorized only with clear hostile act or intent, confirmed by higher authority. The mission planning room looked like someone had tried to compress a war into a single space. Satellite images were taped edge to edge along one wall, black and white grids inked over with arrows and numbers. A waist-high sand table dominated the center, an apartment block carved in foam and wood, alleyways traced in darker sand. Reyes planted her hands on the table's edge, grit pressing into her palms as she studied the model. 3rd floor, corner unit, single stairwell, 1 main entry, 1 narrow service corridor, too few angles, too many blind spots. Target footprint matches Vale's last 2 suspected locations. The intel briefer droned from the far side of the room. Local time 0200 L infill recommended. Minimal civilian movement, though we can't rule out family presence. A projector hummed, throwing a blown-up satellite view onto the whiteboard. The apartment block glowed faintly. Next to it, someone had written in red, Raven, primary assault. Culver Spriggs stood beside the whiteboard with a marker in one hand, cap tucked under his arm. His posture said open discussion. The tightness around his eyes said decision already made. Intel window is short, he said. We have a probable Vale presence in this block. Tonight plus tomorrow night. After that, she ghosts again. Raven is our best shot within reach. They step off in 36 hours. Reyes turned from the sand table. 36 hours isn't enough to rewire how they think in a hallway. Briggs capped the marker with a click. They've already completed your course. They've completed the sanitized version of it, Reyes said. We just watched 3 incidents where this exact ROE got people killed. You send them like this. Vale will read them like a checklist. The intel officer shifted his weight, clearly wishing himself invisible. Laptop fans whirred on the table, the only noise as the room waited for Briggs's response. ROE is not changing because you don't like the optics, Briggs said. We teach what we're given. We fight under the rules we have. You of all people know that, Lieutenant Commander. I know exactly what happens when those rules hit someone who studies them harder than we do, Reyes replied. She tapped the edge of the sand table, where the model hallway funneled into a carved-out room. What's the plan if she's kneeling right here when they breach? Hands up, unarmed, shuffling toward that corner? Briggs stared at the model. They establish control, restrain, search, move her to a secure area. And if that corner hides a floor vent wired to a remote? She asked. If she's the trigger and the bait? That's what your training is for, Briggs said. Not doctrine revisions 48 hours before go time. 36, she corrected. He gave her a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. All the more reason not to start a holy war over language. Reyes wanted to argue that it wasn't language, it was survival. But she could feel the edge of the line already under her boots. One more step, and he'd yank her off the course entirely. So, what's my role? She asked instead. Briggs uncapped the marker again and wrote on the corner of the whiteboard. Advisor, LTCDR Reyes. He underlined it once. You sit in the Joint Operations Center, he said. You advise? You watch their feeds? You help with calls within ROE? Tactical lead on the ground is Raven 1. Clear? It landed like a demotion she technically didn't have. Her doctrine, her pattern recognition, her ghosts, pushed 2 levels back from the breach point. Advisor, she repeated. The word tasted like being locked behind glass. Briggs misread her tone as agreement. Good. Use the next day and a half to run them through whatever scenario lanes you want, within the approved playbook. Then we execute. He nodded to the intel briefer, signaling the meeting was over. Chairs scraped, boots scuffed sand from the table's edge as people filtered out. The projector fan winded down with a soft whine. Reyes stayed where she was, tracing a finger along the miniature stairwell. 3rd floor, corner unit. She pictured a woman on her knees in that tiny foam room, shuffling toward the model's shaded corner. If she couldn't change the ink in the handbook or the ROE orders flowing from someone else's desk, she could still do one thing. She could make sure Raven failed safely here, before they had the chance to fail fatally there. She picked up a fine brush from the table and dragged a darker line along the base of the sand table wall, marking a narrow recess. A vent. A suggestion. Behind her, Hallie paused in the doorway. You heard the Colonel, Reyes. No rewriting the world. I'm not rewriting it, she said without looking at him. I'm tracing it more accurately. He sighed. Just keep it realistic. We don't need unwinnable drills wrecking morale. She almost told him that the unwinnable drill was already waiting 3 stories up in a real city block. Instead, she said, copy. When he left, she stepped back and took in the model. With a few more tweaks, tightening the hallway, adjusting a doorway, shifting the corner, she could make it look uncomfortably like the buildings on Khan's map. Raven's final training lane would not follow the neat script in the course handbook. It would follow Veil. If the rulebook had become a liability, then the lane itself would become the real manual, written in sand and sweat, 24 hours before anyone bled for the edited version. Identical to deployment ROE, no engagement on unarmed kneeling detainees without positive weapon identification. Use of force must be de-escalatory once surrender is signaled. The desert sky over the Mount site had turned the color of old bruises, purple and yellow bleeding into each other as the sun dropped behind concrete mock-ups. Sodium floodlights buzzed to life one by one, throwing harsh cones over the alleys. Reyes stood just outside the kill house, headset resting around her neck, clipboard under her arm. A strip of reflective tape marked the start line beneath her boots. Beyond it, the lane she'd rebuilt from sand and foam now loomed in real concrete. Narrow hallway, third room on the right, blind corner. A vent cut into the floor where no one expected one. Raven clustered around a whiteboard where Hallie sketched a simple layout. He kept it deliberately vague. Door, corridor, objective room. No mention of what waited on its far side. Their M4A1s hung slung across plate carriers, barrels capped with UTM kits. Reyes watched them absently note the safety brief. UTM marking rounds only, single PVS 14 per man, eye protection mandatory. None of that would matter when the real lesson hit. Standard capture of HVT plus associates, Hallie said. Expect one compliant, maybe 2 squirters. Detainee ROE same as always. No surprises. Reyes swallowed a bitter taste. That last part was a lie, and it had her name on it. Lieutenant Commander? Hallie turned to her. Anything for the boys before they step off? She looked at the team. Malik met her gaze head-on, jaw already set in a way that said he was still, thinking about the doctrine pages in her pocket, about the line that no longer existed in theirs. Treat this like a real hit, Reyes said. Not a checkbox. Watch your corners. Watch your detainees. You don't get points for being nice if you're dead. A couple of them cracked tight smiles, thinking she was being darkly funny. Malik didn't. Raven 1 gave a small nod. Copy, ma'am. They filed to the stack point at the lane entrance. Reyes moved up to the observation window, one-way glass cut into the concrete, where she could see the interior hallway and the target room. Inside, the role player sat on her mark. A local hire, small frame, baggy clothes, a scarf covering her hair. She wore a set of soft knee pads under a long skirt so she could drop quickly onto the painted kneel just inside the doorway. You sure she's okay with this? Hallie murmured beside Reyes, following her gaze. She's been briefed, Reyes said. She knows to move toward the corner on her knees once they enter. Hands up, slow. And the charge? Reyes looked to the far corner of the room, where a training charge sat under the floor vent. Low blast, mostly noise and dust, enough to tag anyone standing over it with talc and bruises. She'd argued it down from something harsher. Even now it felt like a compromise. Set to sting, not maim, she said. Your safety officer signed off. Hallie grunted, unconvinced. I still say unwinnable lanes don't teach much. They teach where the rulebook ends, Reyes said. The lane controller's voice came over the loudspeaker. Raven, stand by. 3, 2, 1, execute, execute. From the window, she watched them flow in. First man through, weapon light snapping left, then right. Second, third, fourth, muzzles slicing the air. The faint thwack of boots on concrete reached her through the glass, muted. They were good. Clean. Angles cleared in textbook arcs. For a moment, pride twisted with dread in Reyes's chest. They deserved better rules than the ones she was about to drown them in. Raven 1 halted just short of the objective room. Hand signal. Stacked bodies compressed tight against the wall. The number 2 man reached for the handle. Inside, the role player heard the faint scrape and moved to her start position. Knees bent, weight ready to drop. Breach! Breach! Raven 1 hissed. The door flew inward. Weapon lights punched holes in the dim. The woman dropped to her knees instantly, hands on her head, face turned away from the glare. Exactly as scripted. Reyes felt every muscle in her body coil. She could kill the lane right here. Call some minor safety violation, declare index, let them go home thinking they'd aced it. Let the rulebook stay comfortable. Instead, She opened her hand on the clipboard, consciously relaxing her fingers. Raven One's helmet cam beamed the scene to monitors inside the control room behind her. Reyes didn't turn to look. She kept her eyes on the real thing, on the tiny shifts in posture that no pixels captured well. "Detainee compliant," Raven One called. "Kneeling, no visible weapon." "Copy," the lane controller replied, dutifully playing the part of remote higher authority. "Treat as non-threat. Proceed with search and secure." Reyes had written that phrase once. Treat as non-threat. It tasted like ash now. The number 2 man closed in, muzzle dipping as he fumbled flex cuffs from a pouch. Malik hung back in the doorway, covering the room with his rifle. From the window, Reyes saw his stance, weight on the balls of his feet, tension in his shoulders. He didn't like this any more than she did. "Kneel and stay still," the cuff man barked at the woman in halting local language. She obeyed, hands still on her head. Reyes watched her toes. Any real veil would shift weight there first, small tests of balance before moving. The role player did exactly as instructed. Subtle scoots forward, knees dragging, inching toward the vent. Hey, stop!" Malik warned, rifle tracking her. "Stay!" The woman didn't understand the English, or pretended not to. She kept shuffling. Lane ROE echoed in Reyes's mind. No engagement on unarmed, kneeling subject. She had designed the scenario so there was no angle to reposition to safety without either tackling the woman or shooting her. Both were forbidden by the words she'd been ordered to teach. "Reyes?" Hallie said, low. "You seeing this?" "Yes," she said. Her voice sounded flat even to her. The woman's knees crossed the painted line she'd marked earlier that afternoon. 2 more shuffles, and she'd be over the vent. Raven One looked back toward the imaginary higher authority in his ear, waiting for guidance that would not come. Reyes could feel the headset around her own neck like a collar. She did not touch the transmit key. "Do we stop it?" Hallie asked. "No," she said. Malik shifted to keep his barrel off her head and away from the corner. The geometry betrayed him. Every angle left someone exposed over the vent. "Ma'am, we're boxed." Raven One's voice came over the speakers, tinged with frustration. "Detainee keeps moving. No weapon PID. We're stuck." Reyes closed her eyes for half a beat. So were 3 units she'd just watched die on archival footage. "Continue lane," she told the controller. "No inject." The woman shuffled forward one last time. The charge detonated with a sharp crack and a bloom of dust that slammed against the observation window. Inside, Raven went down in a flail of limbs and shouted curses, rifles clattering. Talc-coated air whirled, catching in the beams of their weapon lights. "Endex! Endex! Endex!" the controller called, hitting the klaxon. Reyes exhaled only when she saw them all, moving, coughing, smearing white dust from goggles and neck seals. No one hurt beyond bruises and pride. Hallie rounded on her. "You set them up," he snapped. "There was no safe play there." She met his anger without flinching. "Exactly. That's the point. You can't run that on a team deploying tomorrow." "I can't not," she said. "Out there, the blast doesn't stop at talc." On the floor below, Malik tore off his helmet, powdered white like someone had erased him with a rubber. He looked up at the observation window, straight at where he knew she stood, eyes burning hotter than the floodlights. Later, in the narrow hallway outside the ready room, he blocked her path with one dust-streaked arm. "Ma'am," he said, voice hoarse, "you wrote a rulebook no one can survive by, and now you're writing lanes to prove it." Reyes held his gaze. the echo of the training blast still ringing somewhere behind her ribs. "Or," she said quietly, "I'm showing you the rules the enemy believes you'll follow. You still think I'm the one killing you?" He didn't answer. The silence between them felt as narrow and lethal as the hallway in the lane. Official guidance remains unchanged. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without clear weapon identification. Instructional staff may clarify but not contradict this in formal training. Wind scraped over the rooftop gravel, carrying the faint chemical tang of spent UTM rounds and smoke sim from the lanes below. The Mount site glowed under floodlights, a fake town in the middle of real desert, its alleys still echoing with the distant pops of another class running night iterations. Reyes stepped out onto the roof and let the door ease shut behind her. Her eyes adjusted slowly from the stairwell's fluorescent glare to the open dark. Malik sat near the low parapet wall, helmet off, NVGs flipped up on his mount like a pair of tired antennae. He had his sleeves pushed to his elbows, forearms dust-streaked from the blast. A half-crushed water bottle rested between his boots. "I figured you'd show up," he said without looking back. "That predictable?" Reyes asked. "Engineered failures usually come with a sales pitch afterward." His words should have stung more than they did. Mostly, they confirmed what she already knew. She had pushed them to the edge, and now she had to pull at least one of them back. She crossed to the parapet and leaned her elbows on it, giving him space. Below, a four-man team flowed along a lit alley, their weapon lights carving moving tunnels. From up here, they looked almost like the training diagrams she'd drawn years ago. Almost. "For the record," she said, "that wasn't engineered failure. That was engineered honesty." Malik snorted softly. "Didn't feel honest. Felt like a rigged game." "It is rigged," she said. "Just not by me." He finally turned his head, studying her in the wash of light from the flood lamps. "You keep saying that? The enemy knows our rules." "Fine. But you wrote half those rules. Then you blow up your own people when they follow them." She let the accusation hang in the air. It wasn't entirely wrong. "Do you know why that line was in my original draft?" she asked, his brow creased. "Which line?" "Shoot her if she moves toward cover after surrender." "The one that disappeared by the time the book hit your hands." "I assumed it was just," he groped for the word, "cold, clinical. Math from someone who's never had to look at the person on their knees." Reyes swallowed once. The memory surfaced whether she wanted it to or not. A different hallway, notched concrete, the metallic smell that came before smoke. A woman on her knees, eyes wide, hands shaking above her head. And behind her. "It wasn't math," she said quietly. "It was a name. Petty Officer Diaz. He was on point for a raid 4 years ago. Different city, same pattern. Kneeling woman, no visible weapon, moving toward a corner. ROE said don't shoot." Malik's gaze locked on her. The distant pops of gunfire below seemed to recede. "She kept edging toward a doorway," Reyes continued. "He held his fire. We all did. We had a remote voice in our ears telling us to wait for a weapon. When she reached the jam, she shifted her shoulders just enough to hide her hands. Then the hallway went white." She stared at her own gloved hands on the parapet, fingers curled in the gravel. When the dust settled, the woman was gone. So was half of Diaz's chest. We found a pressure switch wired into the doorframe. Her moving was the trigger. Her surrender posture kept us from stopping it. Malik's jaw clenched. "I wrote that line that night," Reyes said. "Not because I wanted permission to shoot kneeling women. Because I wanted language that forced us to acknowledge that movement can be a weapon, too. That our mercy gets gamed. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the low hum of the floodlights and the distant commands of instructors. Legal killed it, she added. Public affairs rewrote the rest. Now you get a handbook that tells you to treat any kneeling woman as a protected statue until a gun magically appears in her hand. You're asking me to kill someone who might just be scared, Malik said, voice low. Because maybe she's not. I'm asking you not to pretend there's a safe middle choice when there isn't, Reyes said. In that room tonight, you had 3 options. Break ROE and shoot. Break ROE and tackle her. Or follow ROE and let the blast take you. We built those options. Vale just uses them. He looked back over the fake city. Another training charge popped somewhere. A flash of orange followed by a puff of dust. If I pull the trigger on a kneeling woman, he said, I live with that forever. If you don't, Reyes said softly, I live with your name on a wall that didn't have to exist. So pick who you want to carry it, you or me. He turned that over, gaze hard, jaw working. She didn't push. The wind picked up, snapping a loose bit of tape on a nearby vent, making it flutter like a small flag. Above them, the stars were sharp and indifferent. Finally, Malik spoke. You believe in this that much? I believe in you coming home more than I believe in the people who rewrote my sentences, she said. And I believe Vale is betting that, when it counts, you'll follow the edited version instead of the one that kept Diaz alive in my head. He looked at her for a long time, something shifting behind his eyes. Not agreement. Not yet. But something closer than anger. If you're on the net, he said at last, and you tell me that it's her or us, I'll pull the trigger. He looked away, shoulders tense. But I'm not doing it for a line in a book. I'm doing it because you were there when Diaz died, and I wasn't. Reyes let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't victory. It was a provisional ceasefire with his conscience, and her own. Fair enough, she said. Then I'll make you a deal. I won't say it unless I'm as sure as I was in that hallway. And if I'm wrong, I'll carry it. Not you. Down below, the training lane's klaxon sounded index. The next class would run soon, their own rulebooks tucked into cargo pockets, their own blind spots intact. Up here on a strip of gravel and starlight, Reyes had secured one thin line of trust. A promise that, when the rulebook and reality collided, Malik would choose her voice over the comfort of printed words. Theater directive. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without visual confirmation of a weapon and explicit approval from higher HQ. All questionable engagements to be cleared by the remote commander. The secure comm suite hummed like a beehive in a box. Servers lined one wall, LEDs blinking in rows of green and amber. 2 large monitors dominated the far end, one showing the secure VTC window, the other a grid of live feeds from the prep bay where Raven was kitting up. Lieutenant CMD Talia Reyes adjusted the headset at her temple and tried not to stare at the countdown timer in the corner of the screen. H-hour minus 20 hours. Not much time to convince people 3 time zones away that seconds would matter more than optics. On the prep bay feed, Malik tightened the straps of his plate carrier, the movement economical, jaw set. Raven 1 checked radios on a folding table, tapping each handset in turn. Weapons racks in the background gleamed under harsh white light. M4A1s racked muzzle up, sidearms in blue foam inserts. No one was smiling. Connection coming up, the comms tech murmured. He hit a key. The VTC screen flickered, then resolved into the face of a general in a different bunker. Starched uniform, flag behind him, the faint delay of distant air conditioning in the mic. A legal advisor sat just out of frame, a thin pair of glasses catching monitor light. "Al-Sara, this is Task Force Maine," the general said. "Read me?" Collier Briggs stood beside Reyes, arms behind his back. "Task Force Maine, this is Al-Sara. We have you loud and clear, sir." Reyes kept her eyes on the split. The general's face on one side, Raven's small moving figures on the other. The green glow from the monitors painted her hands when she folded them in front of her. "Let's make this quick," the general said. "I've reviewed your target package. Vale is assessed high value, high risk. You'll have ISR overhead and my full authority within ROE. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Briggs said. "Lieutenant CMDR Reyes will serve as mission advisor in the JOC. Raven 1 has completed her course." The general's gaze slid to Reyes, the slight lag in video making his focus feel almost predatory. "Lieutenant Commander, you're the author of the current urban ops doctrine, correct?" "One of them, sir," she said. "I wrote earlier drafts. And yet your last exercise ended with a full team killed," he replied. Interesting pedagogy. She felt heat rise under her collar but kept her tone even. The lane highlighted an existing vulnerability, not one I invented. Vale has exploited that pattern multiple times. The legal advisor leaned in, murmuring off mic. The general nodded once. "We are not rewriting ROE tonight," he said. "The rules exist to balance mission success with strategic risk. That includes the risk of footage showing our people shooting unarmed women who are on their knees." Reyes's thumbnail dug into her palm where he couldn't see. "Sir, with respect, every second spent reconciling that risk up the chain is a second in which Vale can trigger a device. She has a documented history of using kneeling posture as bait." "We're aware of the reports," the general said, "which is why we'll have multiple eyes on the target. You'll have an overhead FMV platform. My staff and I will be watching. Any ambiguous situation involving a non-combatant, especially female, you will pause, maintain security, and wait for my call." Behind him, someone tapped a keyboard. The comms tech at Reyes's elbow nodded as a document popped up on a side monitor. A fragment of ROE guidance updated with a fresh timestamp. The general continued, "To be explicit, no shots fired at unarmed kneeling females without positive identification of a weapon and my verbal clearance." "Say again." "My verbal clearance." "Is that understood, Lieutenant Commander?" The words slid over her like a tightening harness. They didn't just reflect policy. They codified the hesitation she'd watched on 3 grim videos and 1 training lane. "Yes, sir," she said, because anything else would detonate this conversation in a different way. Briggs added, "Al-Sara copies. Will comply." The general seemed satisfied. "Good. We project that if you execute cleanly, this will be a textbook demonstration of restraint under pressure. The right kind of story. Task Force Maine out." The screen blinked, then shifted back to the overhead map. The prep bay grid remained, a little island of reality in a sea of pixels. Reyes exhaled slowly. The comms tech started to speak, thought better of it, and focused on his console. "That look on your face," Briggs said quietly, "is not helping." "You just heard him, sir," Reyes replied. "He wants a textbook demonstration." "We wrote the wrong textbook." Briggs rubbed a hand over his jaw. "He wants us to avoid a strategic disaster. So do I. And Vale wants us frozen in a hallway while someone 3 countries away decides what qualifies as hostile," Reyes said. I can't talk her into pausing the detonator while we loop in legal. Briggs studied her for a moment. You have their ComNet in the JOC. You have ISR feeds. Do your job within the lines you've got. He left before she could answer. For a long beat, Reyes just watched the prep bay feed. Malik laughed at something Raven 1 said. A short, disbelieving sound that didn't touch his eyes. Then he looked up, as if sensing the cameras. Patch me into the bay, she told the tech. He toggled a switch. You're up on the local PA, ma'am. Raven, this is Reyes, she said, voice steady. Sound check. Raven 1 glanced around, then toward the nearest speaker. We hear you, ma'am. She imagined she was standing in front of them, not separated by walls and wires. You just gained more bosses, she said. A general, legal, half a staff. They'll be watching your feeds. They'll make calls you have to live with. Malik's gaze tracked to the camera. You also have me, Reyes went on. I'll be in the JOC, listening to every breath you take on the net. If something goes sideways, if it feels like the rulebook and reality aren't matching, listen for my voice. I can't break ROE. A small lie, a smaller truth. But I can help you see what the overhead view sees before anyone else does. Raven 1 nodded slowly. Copy, ma'am. She let a brief silence hang, embedding the rhythm of her voice into their nerves. On target, you'll hear a lot of chatter. HQ, analysts, ISR. When it matters, when it's about whether you live through the next 10 seconds, filter for two things. Your team leader and me. She clicked off, the channel dropping to a soft hiss. Around her, the sweet screens glowed green and steady, like a dozen indifferent eyes. The rulebook had never felt so much like a noose. But if she couldn't loosen it, she could at least try to make sure that, when it tightened, it did so around her decisions, not just theirs. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without visual weapon identification and explicit release from higher HQ. Minimize collateral damage. Strict no-fire zones around rooms assessed likely to contain children. The MRAP's suspension turned every bump in the desert road into a dull thud under Reyes's boots. Inside the armored shell, red lights bathed the compartment in a muted glow. Radios crackled in overlapping bursts, each clipped voice identified by a call sign tag scrolling on a small screen above her. She sat strapped into a bench seat, tablet balanced on her knee, headset clamped over one ear. The other ear heard the vehicle, engine growl, rattling brackets, a faint rattle from the rifle rack near the door. Raven 1, check, she said into the mic. Raven 1, loud and clear, came the reply, thinner and more distant than she liked. Behind his voice, the rotor thump of the Blackhawk bled through, fast, steady, inescapable. On her tablet, a split-screen feed. Top half a grainy city map with their ingress route. Bottom half a live IR shot from the helicopter's nose camera. A smear of lights growing brighter as it sped toward the urban sprawl. Time to LZ? She asked. 9 mics, Raven 1 said. Birds clean, teams green. Copy. A new window popped up on the tablet, demanding attention. ISR 3 pushing updated still. A small icon pulsed at the edge of the target grid. Reyes tapped it. A daytime frame filled the screen, captured hours earlier before the sun went down. Same apartment block, same third-floor balcony. A pair of small figures stood in the doorway, one clutching something stuffed and limb-like. A toy, maybe. A child's face turned toward the drone, expression unreadable at this resolution. Her chest tightened. ISR 3, this is Reyes. Confirm timestamp on that still. The overhead operator answered from somewhere back at base, voice filtered through another network. Reyes ISR 3. Timestamp is 14:30 local. Subjects departed frame to South Alley 2 minutes later. No further child-sized signatures observed near target since. Copy. The information did nothing to unknot the feeling under her ribs. Kids didn't evaporate at sunset. They moved inside. She flicked to the building overlay, fingers tracing rooms. Stairwell, main entry, third floor objective room. Until now, she'd color-coded only likely threat areas. Her thumb hovered, then dragged a yellow box across the 2 units adjacent to the objective. No fire zones. The MRAP jostled over a rut. Her stylus skipped on glass, turning one line more jagged than she liked. It didn't matter. The meaning was clear. Tighter constraints in a structure that was already a box of bad angles. "Ma'am?" the vehicle commander called from the front. "ETA to JOC is 10. Roads are quiet." "Copy," she said. 10 minutes for her. 9 for Raven. They'd hit the edge of the city before she hit the operations center. The gap bothered her. She toggled back to the airfeed. Inside the Black Hawk, the cabin camera caught Raven in motion. Straps checked, nods exchanged, gloved hands tapping gear. Malik sat nearest the door, helmet down, gaze fixed on something only he could see. Maybe the lane. Maybe the rooftop. Maybe Diaz, a man he'd never met. "Raven, this is Reyes," she said. "Be advised, ISR shows possible children in adjacent units earlier today. I'm marking 2 apartments beside your objective as no fire zones, unless life of team is at stake." "Say again." "You're working in a mixed-use building. You will hear people who are not your target." Raven 1 replied after a heartbeat. "Copy, no fire zones left and right of objective. We'll keep it surgical." Malik's voice cut in, lower, on the team net, but still feeding her console. "Raven 2 copies. Kids in the stack changes nothing about Vale, ma'am." "It changes how much margin you have," Reyes said. "Your angles will be bad enough. Don't rewrite the ROE for me. I'm already busy doing that in my head." A couple of the operators chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. The Blackhawk's engines climbed in pitch. "Reyes, ISR 3, the overhead operator said. "We're picking up sporadic foot traffic near the block. No weapons visible. Heat signatures small to medium. Civilians likely still awake on lower floors." Of course they were. People lived here. They cooked, argued, watched cheap TVs, while half a continent away staff officers circled strategic narratives on slides. She zoomed in on the aerial view, watching a single bright dot wander across the courtyard, the gate small, uneven. Child or small adult? Hard to tell. "Task Force Main to Al-Sara," a new voice broke in. Staff channel clipped. "Be advised, Hire wants confirmation that ROE guidance was received by assault element prior to infill." Reyes bit back a response that would live forever in a transcript. "This is Reyes. They received and acknowledged initial ROE brief. I have reiterated constraints en route, especially regarding unarmed female subjects and civilians in adjacent units." "Copy," the staffer said. "Task Force Main wants this clean." Clean. She looked at the yellow no-fire boxes on her screen, now sitting like caution tape around the objective. Clean meant no civilian casualties. Clean also meant no headlines about kneeling women. The 2 goals did not always line up with what it took to exit a room breathing. The MRAP slowed, turning. The clank of a gate sounded faintly through the hull. Almost there. She switched back to Raven. "One more thing," she said. "Remember what we talked about. If something on target doesn't match the nice tidy diagrams and you get flooded with voices, filter for 1. Raven 1. Second filter is me. Everyone else is background music." Copy, ma'am, Raven 1 said. We'll dance to your playlist. Malik added. Understood. If you say the word, I won't pretend there's a safer option. The MRAP jerked to a halt. The rear door latch clanged. Cool night air rushed in, smelling of fuel, dust, and distant cooking fires from the local town. Ma'am, Josie entrance, right side, the vehicle commander said. Reyes rose, bones feeling older than they were. She slung her headset around her neck, tablet pressed to her chest like a shield, and dropped down onto the packed earth. Above the low buildings, far to the east, she could just make out the blinking lights of the Black Hawk, a moving star on a fixed sky. Raven, she said quietly, keying her mic one last time before stepping inside. Wheels down in 7. Next time I talk this much, you'll be in somebody else's hallway. Looking forward to it, Raven 1 replied. She wasn't, but she walked into the operations center anyway. The updated ROE and no fireboxes glowing on her screen, like thin lines drawn on the edge of someone else's minefield. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without positive weapon identification and explicit release from higher HQ. Minimize collateral damage. Civilians in adjacent units presumed present. The Joint Operations Center felt too small for the amount of war crammed into it. Screens lined one wall in a stacked grid. Overhead FMV feed, building schematic, Raven's helmet cams in smaller tiles. Radios muttered on 3 different nets, each voice tagged by a tiny label, Raven 1, ISR 3, Task Force Main. Reyes stood with one hand braced on the edge of the console, headset snug against her ear, eyes on the overhead feed. The city lay beneath the drone's IR camera like a cooled forge. Black blocks, narrow alleys, flickers of heat, where air conditioners and people still pushed back the night. There, ISR 3 said. A small bright blur turned a corner, hugging the building line. 4 heat signatures close together, one slightly ahead. Raven is 200 meters from target. No visible armed sentries. Copy, Reyes said. Raven 1, you are green to continue. Raven 1 copies, came the reply, breath controlled but tight. Moving. On his helmet cam, the world bounced in NVG green. Alleyway, stacked shadows, the darker mass of the target block looming ahead. A cat darted across their path and vanished under a parked car. Someone's TV flickered blue in a basement window. Last corner, Reyes said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. If they made the first door clean, maybe the rest would follow. Maybe tonight would finally be the outlier where the pattern didn't show up. Raven 1 raised a hand, the stack compressed. Reyes saw Malik behind him, rifle angled, the faint ghost of his breath clouding the edge of the lens. On my mark, Raven 1 whispered. 3, 2. The keypad beeped under gloved fingers. The main entrance gave way without drama. Someone had left it on the default code, as they often did. Door 1, soft open, he reported, entering. The stairwell swallowed them. Concrete steps, chipped paint, the faint echo of their boots despite their care. A single bulb burned on the first landing, casting hard shadows. Keep it moving, Reyes murmured, eyes flicking between his feed and the overhead view, where 4 heat signatures climbed inside the structure. Fast is your friend. At the second-floor landing, a door cracked open a centimeter. A sliver of yellow light spilled into the stairwell. Reyes's spine went rigid. Second floor, movement, Malik breathed. A man's face appeared, bleary, half in shadow. He squinted at the NVG glare, one hand raised to block it, the other gripping the edge of the door. No weapon, just a vest and sleep-creased shirt. Get him back inside, Reyes said. Quiet. Sir, Step back, stay inside, Raven 1 ordered in the local language, voice low but firm. Police, go back, now. The man froze, then babbled something rapid and anxious. A woman's voice answered from inside the apartment, a sleepy, rising question. A child started crying. So much for clean. Reyes watched the timer in the corner tick up. Each hour plus 3 minutes. The plan had budgeted 2 for stairwell and internal movement. They were already a minute behind. Leave him, she said. Door closed is compliance. Don't get stuck negotiating. Raven 1 pushed the man's hand gently off the frame and swung the door shut. It latched with a soft click. The crying inside spiked, then muffled. They climbed. 3rd floor, the final landing. The air felt tighter on Reyes's side of the screens, as if the stairwell had wrapped around her lungs, too. Objective level, Raven 1 reported. No movement in hallway. His camera panned. Linoleum scuffed by years of traffic. 2 doors on the left, 2 on the right. Their target apartment at the far end, right side. A bare bulb hung crooked from the ceiling, its light swinging slightly in some unseen draft. Stack on target door, Reyes said. Check handle. Raven 1 reached for it, gloved hand turning. The knob refused, locked. Handle's cold, he said. We've got a lock. That small delay, that one turn and stop, made Reyes's teeth clench. Extra seconds, extra noise. Bring up the shotgun, she said. Fast! Raven 3 moved up, breaching shotgun slung forward, muzzle pressed just above the lock. Charge set, he whispered. Ready. Reyes's fingers dug into the console. Do it. The blast blew the door inward in a shower of splinters. The helmet cam whited out for a beat, then recovered to a storm of dust and shifting shadows. Go, go! Raven 1 shouted, the urgent whisper now gone. They flowed in, rifles catching angles. Reyes watched 3 arcs of white light cut the darkness. For a heartbeat, the room seemed empty. Just scattered furniture, a mat on the floor, a cold stove. Then a figure dropped into view. A woman, small, draped in dark fabric, fell to her knees in the center of the room. Hands rose to her head, fingers interlaced, elbows wide. Her head bowed, hair half hidden by a loose hijab. Reyes's heart hammered once. Hard. Every archived frame she'd studied, every training lane she'd built, every nightmare Diaz ever left in her sleep, stacked in that single image. Detainee, Raven 1 called. Female kneeling, hands on head. No visible weapon, no vest. On the overhead feed, the heat signature glowed bright in the center of the 3rd floor unit. Maintain security, Reyes said automatically, mouth dry. Keep her in sight. Malik's voice came through, steady but strained. Raven 2 has her covered. She's unarmed, ma'am. There it was, the sentence the rulebook loved, the one that pinned them to the floor like an order. Before Reyes could respond, another voice cut across the net, louder, layered with the faint echo of a distant room. Raven, this is Task Force Main, the general said. Hold position. Do not engage the female. Say again, no engagement. Maintain control and await further guidance. The words rolled into the room through Raven's earpieces and into the JOC through the speakers, filling both spaces at once. On the screen, the woman shifted slightly on her knees, a small, almost imperceptible shuffle toward the shadowed right-hand corner of the room. Reyes felt the bottom of her stomach drop. The pattern hadn't just followed them here. It had been waiting. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without visual weapon identification and explicit release from Task Force Main. Team to maintain control and de-escalate where possible. The Joint Operations Center went so quiet, Reyes could hear the faint tick of the wall clock between bursts of radio static. On the main screen, Raven's helmet cams showed fragments of the same small room from different angles, 4 cones of white light converging on a single figure on her knees. "Raven, maintain position," the general's voice repeated, calm as a recorded message. "Do not engage the female. Secure and wait." On Raven 1's feed, the woman's shoulders lifted and fell in quick breaths. Her hands stayed laced on her head, but her knees kept tracing tiny arcs on the dirty floor, edging toward the darker corner of the room. "Ma'am, she's moving," Malik said, his voice the only thing that sounded alive. Still no weapon. Reyes's hand tightened on the edge of the console until her knuckles ached. She switched her focus to the overhead FMV feed, fingers dancing on the trackball to zoom in. The third-floor unit bloomed larger, its heat signatures distinct. 4 bright ovals along the near wall, Raven, and 1 kneeling shape taking a slow, diagonal path. In the corner she was drifting toward, the IR showed a cooler rectangle cut into the hot floor. Air circulator, vent, some kind of recess. Cold metal in warm concrete, a perfect place to bury a pressure plate or a small device. ISR-3, confirmed structure feature, northeast corner, objective room, Reyes said, fighting to keep her tone level. The overhead operator zoomed further, the image sharpening. "Reyes, ISR-3. Looks like a floor vent or service access panel. Unable to confirm anything under it from this angle." Her mind supplied the missing details anyway. Wiring, a tamped charge, a cable running down behind a wall. Diaz's hallway layered itself over the grainy footage, the memory so strong she could almost smell the dust. "Copy," she said. On Malik's camera, the woman's knee slid another inch. The beam of his M4's light trembled once at the edge, then held steady. "Task Force Main to Raven," the general said, voice firmer now. "You will comply. With ROE. No shots. Maintain control. We are reviewing feeds for hostile indicators." Reyes heard the legal advisor in the background. Words indistinct, tone urgent. Somewhere, far from this room and that hallway, people were debating terms while a woman's knees counted down meters. "Raven 1, talk to me," she said. "Raven 1, he answered, breathing a little faster. "We have 1 kneeling female center room, moving toward northeast corner. No other visibles. The space is tight. If we close, we're stacked over her path." Reyes pictured the geometry. Doorway behind them, woman in front, corner beyond. Any attempt to circle wide put them right where a vent blast would hurt most. Any attempt to grab her meant committing at least 1 man into contact with an unknown trigger. "Can you reposition to the opposite wall?" she asked. Negative came back in the shape of hesitation. "Room's too narrow, ma'am. We move, we cross over her. We're in the funnel either way." The fatal funnel. She'd drawn that shape 100 times on whiteboards, a wedge of risk extending from every doorway. Right now, the wedge wasn't an abstract diagram. It was Raven in real time. On the main comms, the general spoke again. "Reyes, this is Task Force Main. Confirm your understanding. No engagement on the female unless you can positively identify a weapon. Do not authorize otherwise." Everyone in the JOC turned their heads slightly, as if they could see the weight of the words settling on her shoulders. "Understood," she said aloud. Liar, some buried part of her thought. Or not yet. On Malik's feed, the woman's hands twitched. For a heartbeat, her fingers left her head, as if reaching for balance, then laced again. The movement was small, ordinary, It still made every muscle in Reyes's back lock. "You seeing that, ISR?" she asked. "Affirm," ISR-3 replied. "Subject continues slow forward motion. No visible device in hands." No visible device. The phrase had been in her drafts, too, once. Legal had insisted on it, a gate that turned hesitation into obligation. Diaz would have shot by now, she heard herself say, too softly for the mic. The comms tech glanced at her, not understanding, then looked away. The woman's knees kissed the first edge of the cooler rectangle on the IR feed. Reyes's heart stumbled. "Distance to vent?" she asked, more to anchor herself than for the answer. "Maybe half a meter left," ISR-3 said. "At her current rate, 10 seconds. 10 seconds. In that span, she had to decide whether she was going to be the one who broke the chain of command, or watched Raven get broken instead. "Task Force Main to Raven," the general said, his tone acquiring frost. "Hold your positions. If she reaches the wall, you restrain. You do not shoot an unarmed woman on her knees. That is a direct order." Reyes could practically hear the transcripts being written in real time. If this went wrong, the words would live forever in a file next to her own. Her thumb hovered over her transmit key. "Ma'am," Malik said quietly on the team channel that bled into hers, "this feels like your lane." She knew which one he meant. The unwinnable drill, the manufactured blast. The one she'd used to make them feel this exact pressure. Now they were back in it, with nothing but lives and careers on the line. "Raven 2, she said softly. "Are you stable?" "As I'm gonna get," he replied. "You say it, I do it. That was the deal." The woman's knees slid again. On the IR feed, one bright oval now overlapped the cooler rectangle of the vent. Another shuffle and she'd be centered over it. "Reyes," the general snapped, his voice cutting across every channel. "You are not to authorize fire. Confirm." Her finger settled on the transmit switch. She could feel the plastic give slightly, a tiny tactile threshold between obedience and something else. The room around her faded, the screens, the staff, the distant hum of generators. All she saw was the white-limbed figure on her knees over the vent and 4 heat signatures trusting words she'd written and others had changed. If she let the next 10 seconds pass in silence, the rulebook would own whatever happened. Diaz's ghost knew what that looked like. She drew a breath that felt like it scraped her lungs raw and pressed the key. "Raven," she said, her voice cutting through the static. "On my command. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without visual weapon identification and explicit release from Task Force Main. Orders from higher are binding on all subordinate commanders." "Raven, on my command." Reyes heard her own voice cut through the net, sharp as a slap. Every head in the JOC turned toward her, eyes wide. On the screen, the kneeling woman slid another inch, knees now half over the cooler rectangle of the vent. "Reyes." The general's voice hit a second later, hard and clipped. "You will not authorize fire. That is a direct order." Her thumb stayed on the transmit key. 2 channels, 1 frequency, 1 hallway. Someone would win. "Ma'am?" Malik breathed in her headset. "Say it or don't. We're out of seconds." Reyes's thoughts narrowed to a single tight corridor of possibility. A direct shoot would hang her with 1 word. Silence would hang all of them with shrapnel. Somewhere in between was a phrase that might save their bodies at the cost of her name. She inhaled once. When she spoke again, her tone dropped into the clipped rhythm of brevity codes they all knew. "Raven 2, she said, ignoring the general. "This is Reyes. Break." Deny subject movement to northeast vent by any means before she contacts the corner. You understand your interdiction tasking, over? Not engage. Not fire. Interdict movement. Deny contact. Words she could argue later had multiple tools under them. Words that, to Malik, on that threshold, meant exactly one thing. There was the barest hitch in his breathing. Raven 2 copies interdiction, he said. If she moves, I stop the trigger source. In the background, the general erupted. Negative, negative. Raven 2, disregard. You will not. The woman's knees completed their drift, the bright oval on the IR feed now centered over the vent. Reyes could see the fine tremor in Malik's weapon light as it tracked her. Everything telescoped into that single frame. Diaz's body, the unwinnable drill, the red ink on margins, Malik's dusted face in the observation window. Execute, Reyes said. Malik fired. The single report from his M4A1 cracked in every headset and speaker at once, startling even those who'd spent careers listening to gunfire. On the camera, the woman's head snapped back. Her body jolted and then collapsed sideways, slack, hands finally leaving her head to flop boneless toward the floor. For half a heartbeat, the room and the JOC hung in stunned silence. Reyes's pulse roared in her ears, drowning even the radios. Then the floor vent detonated. The blast tore up through the empty corner where her knees would have been. Dust and fragments punched into the air, a dirty blossom of force and debris. The cameras went to static for an instant as the pressure wave hit them. The overhead IR bloom flared white, then slowly dimmed. Alarms screamed in the JOC, a local system reacting to the shock wave transmitted through sensors. Someone cursed behind her. Another person grabbed the console to steady themselves as if the blast had shaken this building too. Raven, sit rep! Reyes snapped, already pushing down her own surge of relief and horror. Static hissed in her ear. Then Raven 1 came back, coughing. We're up. Minor ringing, some debris. One down. Subject is down. His camera steadied, pulling a jostled view of the room back into focus. The corner where the vent had been was a shredded, smoking mess. Fragments of concrete and metal embedded in the far wall. The blast radius line, the one she'd sketched on sand and in her head, stopped just shy of where the nearest operator stood. If they'd stepped in, they would have been inside it. Raven 2? Reyes demanded. Malik's voice came through, rough but alive. Still here, ma'am. Took some dust. Team's good. Only then did her legs threaten to give out. She locked her knees, fingers digging into the console's edge until the plastic creaked. The general's voice returned, higher, angrier. What the hell was that? He shouted. You disobeyed! Reyes, you explicitly… She flicked her transmit to the command net. Task Force Main, this is Reyes, she said, keeping her tone as flat as she could. Raven 2 executed a movement interdiction to prevent subject from reaching a known structural hazard. Subsequent blast from that hazard confirms hostile use. Engagement was in defense of the team. You ordered him to shoot an unarmed woman, the general snapped. I ordered him to stop a trigger from completing contact with a vent that just detonated with enough overpressure to kill 4 operators, she replied. We can argue adjectives later. Right now, my team is alive. Around her, staffers pretended to study screens harder, trying to make themselves small and incorporeal. No one moved to mute either channel. No one wanted ownership of the moment. On Raven 1's feed, Malik glanced once toward the camera, as if through it to wherever she stood. His face was speckled with dust, eyes reddened, but his rifle was steady. The body at his feet lay still, a dark shape against a ruined corner. "Raven," Reyes said, forcing her voice back to the work. "Secure room. Check for secondaries. Then consolidate. No complacency. Veil liked layered traps." "Copy, ma'am," Raven 1 answered. The general's breathing crackled hot in her ear. "This conversation is not over, Lieutenant Commander," he said, each word clipped, controlled rage. "You have exceeded your authority in a way that will be examined in detail." Reyes kept her gaze on the screens, not the invisible man behind the voice. "Understood, sir," she said. "Recommend we keep the examination until after the team is off the X." She cut her mic, just long enough to let herself feel the tremor in her hands. She had broken the chain. The consequences would come. But for the first time since Diaz bled out in a hallway 4 years ago, the pattern had finally broken too. Engagement against non-combatants remains under investigation. Until further notice, all follow-on actions must minimize force and avoid additional civilian harm. The alarms in the JOC were still screaming when the dust began to settle on the screens. Red indicators flashed along the top of the main monitor. Blast, detected, structural shock. Each one demanding attention, Reyes did not have to spare. "Kill the audible," she snapped. A tech slammed a palm on the panel. The siren cut off mid-wail, leaving behind a ringing silence made of strained breathing and humming electronics. On the overhead IR feed, the third-floor unit glowed like a wound. Heat haze from the vent blast slowly bleeding into the surrounding concrete. Raven's signatures jittered, moving, thank God moving. "Raven, status!" Reyes said, voice harder than she felt. Static, a cough, then Raven 1 came back. "4 effectives," he said between breaths. "Light ringing, no major trauma, minor lacerations, room is messy." His helmet cam came into focus as he wiped dust from the lens. The image steadied on a space that looked like someone had taken a bite out of the corner. Concrete, cracked and peeled back around the vent. Shards embedded in the opposite wall. Fragments of cheap furniture lay scattered, their shapes barely recognizable. In the foreground, the woman's body lay on its side, one arm crooked awkwardly, fabric darkening where Malik's round had entered. There was no twitch, no hint of movement. Whatever life she'd had before that 10 seconds was gone. Reyes heard the general inhale sharply on the command net. "Confirm no additional devices," she said, forcing her attention away from the body. "Sweep for secondaries, tripwires, pressure plates. Keep your spacing." "Raven 3, check vent wreckage," Raven 1 ordered. "Raven 4, cover hall. Malik, stay on the subject until we're sure there's no dead man switch." Malik's camera tilted, panning along the woman's outstretched hand. No wires, no clutch detonator, just fingers relaxed in the dust. "Subject's clear," he reported. "No switch, no belt." He swallowed, voice rough. "This was the trigger, ma'am. That vent." In the JOC, someone exhaled a curse they immediately tried to swallow. "Reyes," the general said, tone gone cold again. "We are dispatching an EOD team to confirm. Until they clear that room, your people do not move further into the building without my authorization." "Say again. Hold." Reyes's jaw flexed. At least now the pause had a reason beyond fear of optics. "Copy," she said. "Raven 1, hold internal. ISR, scan adjacent units for movement." "ISR 3, the overhead operator said. "We have heat in the apartment left of objective. 2 signatures, small and medium. Probably the same child and adult from earlier. No armed indicators. Right side unit shows 1 adult pacing. No mass movement towards stairwell. Civilians still in their boxes, listening to a war happen through their walls." Task local QRF to secure perimeter, Reyes said. Quietly. No kicking doors unless Raven calls for it. She shifted channels. Medical, stand by for possible evac, but do not crowd the building entrance unless we get a casualty call. I want clear lanes out if we need them. Behind her, staffers moved more purposefully now, scribbling notes, relaying messages, anything to keep from staring at the frozen image of the dead woman on the main screen. Reyes, came another voice, this one clipped and bureaucratic, probably the legal advisor finally stepping fully onto the net. You will mark and preserve all radio logs and video feeds from the last 10 minutes for investigation. No deletions, no edits. Her mouth went dry. Understood, she said. All data is being recorded and mirrored. Additionally, the legal voice continued, further dissemination of imagery from inside the objective is prohibited without explicit authorization from Task Force Main. That includes internal training use. A preliminary ROE inquiry will convene upon mission completion. There it was, the first formal bite of the machine. Copy, Reyes said. On Raven 3's feed, gloved hands probed the torn vent housing with a small mirror and light. He spoke without looking up. We've got fragments of a device here. Looks like a shaped charge, directional. No obvious secondary. EOD on the ground channel chimed in. From that blast pattern, anyone over that vent would have lost legs at least. And anyone kneeling on it would have been... She cut the thought off before it finished. Reyes, Raven 1 said. You should see this. His camera swung back to the body. Another operator had rolled the woman enough to expose a part of her face. Careful, almost gentle. There was no gore, just slack features, dust settling on lashes, a smear of dark near the temple. But it was her eyes that hit Reyes, the shape of them, the set of the jaw around them. She'd seen grainy stills and intel packets, sketches based on witness descriptions. None had been this clear. Malik spoke softly into his mic. Ma'am, I think this is her. Her who? The general demanded. Veil, Reyes said, before anyone else could. Facial structure matches composite. Roll matches pattern. And she was sitting on the bomb she designed. Silence met that. The kind that meant people were recalibrating a story in their heads. ISR 3, the legal advisor said, voice suddenly hungry for confirmation. Capture stills of the subject's face and transmit on secure channel to ID cell. Already on it, ISR 3 replied. Reyes stared at the monitor. She felt both heavier and hollow. She had just ordered a shot that killed a woman headquarters had wanted alive long enough to put on a slide and maybe a courtroom chair. A woman who had killed quietly through posture and timing. Reyes, the general said at last, tone brittle. Until confirmation, that is still an unarmed female subject killed under ambiguous circumstances following a direct order not to fire. Do not pretend this is closed. She closed her eyes briefly. Behind her lids, the image didn't change. Diaz, the training lane, now this room. I'm not pretending anything, sir, she said. I'm acknowledging we just removed the architect of 3 ambushes and prevented a 4th at the cost of 1 shot I was told never to authorize. The legal advisor cut in. Which is exactly why we need every second of that audio. One of the techs glanced at her, sympathy and wariness mixed. His cursor hovered over a folder tagged with the operation name, recording icons blinking. Lock it, she told him. Read only, double mirrored. He nodded, fingers moving. On the floor, Raven began methodically clearing the rest of the apartment, stepping around the body with the professional detachment of people who had walked past too many. Malik was quieter now, his movements tight but controlled, muzzle tracking doorways, not ghosts. "Any other occupants?" Reyes asked. "Negative," Raven 1 said. "One subject, KIA. No other bodies, no squirters, just us and her." Just us and her. It sounded like the title of a report she'd never be allowed to see. "Then you hold until EOD signs off," she said. "We're not making her apartment the last room you ever stand in." As she watched them move, the weight of what came next settled over her. Interviews, transcripts, panels. They would replay these 10 seconds, frame by frame, word by word, asking if she could have done anything else. She already knew the answer. "Task Force Main," she said quietly, flipping back to the command net. "Once EOD clears, recommend immediate exfil for Raven. This building has given us everything it has." There was a pause, then a begrudging, approved. Investigation or not, they were coming home. For now. "The incident is under formal review. All findings will assess compliance with guidance forbidding engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without explicit higher approval." The interview room had no windows, no clock, and no art. Just 4 walls painted an institutional off-white that made every shadow look tired. A camera bulged from one corner near the ceiling. On the table, 2 small digital recorders sat side by side, red lights glowing steadily like coals. "L'Autentizo KBMD." Talia Reyes sat in the lone chair on one side, hands folded, uniform crisp. Across from her, a 3-person panel arranged their papers. A commander from JAG, a civilian in a muted suit, and a senior officer whose name tape matched none of the units in theater. The hum of the air conditioning filled the spaces between their movements. "We're ready to begin," the JAG commander said at last. His voice was calm, practiced, almost gentle. "For the record, this is Interview 3A in the Rules of Engagement Inquiry, Operation." He recited the code name, "Conducted at..." He glanced at a note. "Time classified, location classified, participants as previously identified." He pressed a button. The recorder's lights flicked to a slightly faster blink. "Lieutenant Commander Reyes," he said, "you understand that this is a non-criminal administrative inquiry at this stage, but that your statements will be recorded and may be used in further proceedings." "Yes, sir," she said. "Good." He shuffled to the top of a stack. "Let's start with the radio traffic at timestamp 2001 to 2005 local, from your advisory position in the Joint Operations Center. You've reviewed the transcript?" A printed bundle lay in front of her, lines of text broken up with timestamps and call signs. Her own words sat there in stark black ink. "Deny subject movement. By any means. Execute." "I have," Reyes said. "Do you dispute its accuracy?" "No, sir." The civilian leaned forward slightly, fingers laced. "Lieutenant Commander, higher headquarters had explicitly ordered that the kneeling female not be engaged without positive weapon identification and express clearance. You were on the same net when that order was given, correct?" "Yes." "And yet you issued what Raven 2 understood as a fire command." Reyes kept her eyes on the transcripts. "I issued a movement interdiction tasking to prevent a subject from reaching a known structural hazard that subsequently detonated," she said. "Raven 2 executed that tasking with lethal force." The senior officer spoke for the first time, voice flat. "Spare us doctrinal euphemisms, Lieutenant Commander. Did you or did you not intend for Raven 2 to fire his weapon at the subject?" She felt the question land like a weight between them. If she said no, she might wriggle through a loophole, let ambiguity muddy the water, and leave Malik standing alone on the far side. "Yes, sir," she said. The word cost something on the way out. I intended that he have the option of lethal force in order to stop her before she reached the vent. I believed non-lethal options would put him over the device. An option is different from an order, the JAG commander said. Yet your wording, by any means, left him with little doubt. That was the point, Reyes replied. The civilian slid a different page forward. Raven 2 states in his interview that he wouldn't have fired without her phrasing it that way. He says, and I quote, "I'd committed to her judgment beforehand. When she said stop the trigger source, that was the green light." Are you aware of that? I read his statement, yes. Do you believe him? Reyes pictured Malik's face on the rooftop, dust streaked in the lane, eyes locked onto hers through a screen as the woman knelt over the vent. You say it. I do it. Yes, she said. I believe him. The senior officer tapped a pen against the transcript. You could have complied with the general's order and remained silent. You chose not to. Why? She thought of Diaz, of the archival SIGACs, of the sand table vent, of the way the woman's knees had crossed that invisible line. Because I had every reason to believe that if I stayed silent, the team would be killed by a device I could see forming in front of them, she said. The pattern was clear. The structural feature was in the exact path she was taking. Prior incidents showed the same setup. I weighed the risk to them against the risk to my career and made a choice. And you decided your judgment outweighed that of the theater commander, the civilian said. I decided that 10 seconds in a hallway outweighed discussions happening hundreds of miles away, Reyes replied. If that's arrogance, then I accept that label. But I'd make the same call again with the same data. The JAG commander studied her for a long moment. What we need to determine, he said, is whether Raven 2 bears individual responsibility for violating ROE, or whether he was acting under unlawful or overbroad orders from an advisor without command authority. This was the hinge. She could step back and let Malik share the load, or move forward and take it all. Raven 2 acted under my direction, she said. I created the expectation in prior conversations that I would guide him in that exact scenario. I gave an order that could reasonably be interpreted as overriding what he heard from higher. If there is blame, it's mine. The senior officer narrowed his eyes. So you would characterize his action as compelled. He had discretion, Reyes said carefully. He could have refused, but he trusted me. That trust is a form of compulsion when you're looking down a barrel and the person who wrote your manual says there's only one way out. The civilian looked dissatisfied, but the JAG commander nodded slowly, as if a piece had clicked. Very well, he said. Here's where we are. The preliminary finding is that the engagement, while in violation of explicit ROE guidance at the time, directly prevented a hostile act that would likely have resulted in multiple friendly fatalities. Given that and your acknowledgement of intent, the panel is prepared to recommend an administrative action rather than criminal charges. He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside is a formal reprimand, classified. It will remove you from eligibility for operational command billets and from doctrinal authorship roles that involve ROE language. You will not discuss the specifics of this incident outside cleared channels. Do you understand the implications? She did. No teams, no doctrine committees, no front page on any manual, not even the footnotes. Her influence would end here, pinned to a piece of paper that would itself be hidden. Yes, sir, she said. You should know, the civilian added, perhaps out of some late-breaking conscience. Raven 2's record will note that he acted under your direction in a complex, time-sensitive scenario. No further action is planned against him. That, at least, loosened something around her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. The reprimand itself was 3 pages of careful language about judgment, exceeding advisory scope, and extra ROE interpretive guidance. She read every line, even though the meaning had been clear before she broke the seal. At the bottom, a blank waited for her signature. The JAG commander placed a pen beside her hand. "You are not required to agree with the content," he said, "only to acknowledge receipt." She picked up the pen. The plastic felt too light for what it carried. "I acknowledge," she said, and signed her name. The recorders blinked on, indifferent. In some vault, this moment would live as lines of audio and text. Out at Al-Sara, the lanes would keep running, new teams learning edited rules from edited manuals. If there was going to be any trace of what had really happened in that room, it wouldn't be in this file. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander," the senior officer said, closing his folder. "You are dismissed. You will remain in theater for now, pending final administrative routing." Reyes rose. For a second the room tilted, not from any blast, just from the quiet shift in who she was allowed to be. Outside, the corridor was as blank as the room. As the door latched behind her, she realized that whatever else the inquiry had taken, it had left her one thing she hadn't expected. Malik's slate was clean. Hers, officially, would never be. Official doctrine updates will reflect theater guidance. No language that could be interpreted as pre-authorizing lethal force against kneeling, unarmed subjects. All instructional materials must conform. The office felt too big for one person and too small for what Reyes was trying to do in it. A single fluorescent tube hummed overhead, bathing the room in a tired wash of light. Outside the thin window, the desert wind pawed at the pane, rattling it in short, impatient bursts. On her desk lay a stack of fresh paper, still warm from the printer. The top page bore the new title block in bold: Urban Operations, Revised Edition. Beneath it, the section that had once been hers, now scrubbed and polished, until it could have been written by anyone who had never set foot in a real stairwell. She flipped to the section she knew best by heart: detainee handling, surrender posture, non-combatant considerations. The language was familiar and wrong all at once. Once surrender is verified and no weapon is visible, subject will be treated as non-hostile. Any further movement is to be interpreted in the least escalatory light consistent with force protection. Least escalatory. As if the enemy ever played by that rule. Reyes picked up the red pen from beside the stapler. Its plastic felt flimsy, but when she uncapped it, the tip looked almost surgical. She drew a line through least escalatory, the ink thick and uncompromising. In the margin she wrote, "Movement toward cover, blind zones, or structural anomalies is potential hostile intent. Reassess, reposition, or neutralize before contact is made." Neutralize. The word would make legal twitch. That was fine. They weren't supposed to see this copy. The printer in the corner whirred to life again, spitting out another set of pages. Her doing. She'd queued 6 drafts, the official one, and then a shorter, sharper document she'd built in the gaps between after-action reports and inquiries. An annex with no letterhead, no author, just a title in plain font: Urban Contact Supplement. Kneeling subject pattern, unofficial. She set the sanitized manual aside and pulled the annex toward her. It was only 8 pages. Brevity by necessity. Each paragraph distilled from footage and bodies. Pattern veil, subject, often female. Assumes kneeling posture with hands on head to exploit ROE hesitation. Movement is characterized by incremental advances toward structural features, vents, door jambs, blind corners. Teams must treat surrender posture as camouflage, not proof of non-hostility. She read the lines again, listening for any stray ego. This wasn't about being right. It was about being clear. The reprimand in her personnel file had already cut her out of official doctrine loops. She wasn't here to fix the main book anymore. But no one had said anything about supplemental handouts. She moved through the document with the red pen, tightening sentences that wandered, circling phrases that could get a young sergeant fired if misquoted. In the margins, she added scenario prompts. Run this as a lane, don't tell them the trick. Let them fail once before it counts. The wind outside gusted harder, rattling the window so sharply she half expected it to crack. Somewhere beyond the office, the mount site lights burned on, throwing harsh rectangles into the dark. She imagined a new class walking those alleys next week, their instructors flipping through binders that might or might not contain these pages. Future teams are going to die for something written in passive voice, she muttered. She finished the last page and stacked the annex, tapping the edges to align them. No logo, no classification stamp. At the bottom of the final sheet, she'd left the author line blank, just a dash where a name would go. It felt fitting. Reyes stood, gathering both stacks, the official manual draft and her red-streaked supplement. She slid the annex under the main document's clipped corner, so only the title peeked out. To anyone not looking closely, it would seem like just another appendix. She turned off the light and stepped into the corridor. The late-hour quiet wrapped around her. Even the air conditioners sounded subdued. Down the hall, the instructor workroom door stood ajar, light spilling onto the floor. Inside, two younger officers hunched over laptops, faces lit by blue screens. A coffee pot gurgled on a hot plate. Reyes set the combined stack on the side table where instructors dumped student handouts and new course material. She didn't announce it. She just placed it there, spine out, the unofficial annex tucked in like a secret. As she turned to leave, one of the younger instructors, Linton Connor, she remembered, new to Alsara, looked up. His gaze tracked to the papers, then to her. "Ma'am," he said, hesitating. "Is that new doctrine stuff?" "Supplement," she said. "Patterns the main book doesn't like talking about." He slid his chair back, picked up the top page, and flipped until he reached the annex. His eyes scanned the first lines. "Kneeling subject pattern," he read under his breath. "This isn't in any of the packets from HQ." "That's why it's labeled unofficial," Reyes said. He looked up again, something sharper in his expression now. "Did you write this?" She held his gaze. For a moment she considered lying, letting it be just another anonymous ghost in the system. But influence required at least a little trust. "I wrote the version of the rulebook you never saw," she said. "This is what's left of it." Connor glanced back down at the page. His jaw tightened, like someone recognizing a map of a road they'd almost taken blind. "Do you mind if I teach from it?" he asked. "Off the record." "That's the only way it comes," Reyes said. He nodded, already marking the annex with a sticky note. "The kids need this, especially the bit about vents." She almost smiled at that. "Just don't tell anyone who handed it to you," she said. "Wouldn't know who to name anyway," he replied, eyes back on the text. As she stepped out of the room, the printer behind her started again, Connor making copies, she guessed. The red ink in the margins would go with them, ghosting into briefings and lanes, passed hand to hand without attribution. Reyes walked back down the quiet corridor toward the night and the wind and the training grounds. The official record would say she'd been removed from doctrine work, her judgment constrained. But somewhere between the lines and the lanes, her words were still moving, quiet, anonymous, and dangerously clear. Official guidance remains unchanged in public documents. No engagement of unarmed, kneeling females without weapon PID and higher release. The annex and movement interdiction lesson exist only in closed rooms. The mess hall at Al-Sara always felt too bright at night, as if the overhead fluorescents didn't know when to stop. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the light. Empty tables stretched in rows, bolted to the floor in case of turbulence that would never come. Lieutenant Simdiadra Talia Reyes sat at the end of one table with a lukewarm mug of coffee cupped in both hands. The taste had gone stale 20 minutes ago, but she kept it as something to do with her fingers. On the far wall, a small television flickered above the condiment station, volume turned just high enough to be heard over the distant clatter from the kitchen. A press briefing played, banner text scrolling across the bottom. Joint Forces praise restraint in precise operation. The image cut to a podium stateside. A spokesperson in a perfect suit smiled carefully at a room of cameras. Behind her, flags and logos formed a backdrop of authority. "Commend the exemplary discipline of our Special Operations Forces," the spokesperson said. Faced with a complex urban environment and the presence of vulnerable populations, they demonstrated restraint and adherence to the rules of engagement, preventing civilian casualties while neutralizing a dangerous threat. No mention of a shot. No mention of a woman on her knees over a vent. Certainly no mention of the word interdiction. Reyes watched without really seeing the faces. The narrative was smooth, clean, like the manual. Public ROE had to be. The rough edges lived elsewhere, in inquiry rooms, red-lined annexes, and the memories of people who woke up sweating at 2 a.m. The camera cut to a blurred still, a night vision image of the target building from a distance. No faces visible, no bodies on the floor. The spokesperson went on about de-escalation and measured response. Measured. Reyes took a sip of coffee that had gone cold and thin. Footsteps sounded behind her, boots on polished concrete. She didn't turn until they stopped a few meters away. "Mess hall's dead," Malik said. She glanced back. He stood there in duty uniform, sleeves rolled, hands tucked loosely into his pockets. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes she didn't remember from before the op. "Wrong time of night for company," she said. "Figured you'd be here," he replied. "They said they were airing the briefing." She turned her eyes back to the television. The spokesperson was answering a question about minimizing harm. "We are deeply committed to ROE compliance," the woman said. "Our operators are trained to hold fire in ambiguous scenarios. This mission is a testament to that discipline." A small, humorless sound escaped Reyes's throat. "Discipline," she said. "That's one word for it." Malik pulled out the chair opposite her and sat, facing the TV at an angle. For a while they both watched the moving images and listened to words that described a place neither of them entirely recognized. "They're really leaning on that 'no civilian casualties' line," he said quietly. "It's accurate," Reyes said. "Just incomplete." The camera cut again, this time to a blurred composite image labeled only HVT, deceased. The face was smudged enough to be unrecognizable, but Reyes saw the jawline, the eyes, the small asymmetry in the nose. Veil. The voiceover called her a skilled bomb maker and architect of several attacks. No mention of kneeling posture, of using surrender as a trigger. Those details were for a different audience. You ever wish they'd say your name up there? Malik asked. The question came out casual, but she caught the weight under it. Not really, she said. It wasn't entirely true. I'd settle for the manual printing one honest sentence. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. On screen, the briefing wrapped. The spokesperson smiled, thanked the press, stepped away from the podium. The feed cut back to a studio analyst discussing professional restraint in modern conflict. Reyes reached for the remote on the next table and hit mute. The room exhaled into sudden quiet. For what it's worth, Malik said, they got one thing right. They said the team showed restraint. She raised an eyebrow. We all wanted to run, he said, or freeze, or hand the decision to the voice on the big net and pretend we didn't see what we saw. We didn't. We listened to the person who actually knows what a hallway feels like. That's a kind of restraint. She studied him, the way his gaze stayed level but not defiant. That person broke ROE in the process, she said. She broke their ROE, he corrected. Not mine. The reprimand in her file itched, invisible and constant. She didn't mention it. He probably knew anyway. Bases had their ways of distributing gossip. Malik looked down at his hands, then back up. I heard about the administrative outcome, he said carefully. They're not going to let you write rules anymore. Officially, Reyes said. Unofficially, I still own a pen. I saw that annex, he said. Connor walked us through it this afternoon. The kneeling subject pattern one. Reyes kept her face neutral. And it felt like you were in the room again, he said. Only this time, the rules matched what actually almost killed us. He pushed his chair back an inch, then stopped, as if deciding something. You told me you'd carry it if you were wrong, he said. You weren't. I'm still breathing. So if anyone ever asks, if it ever gets ugly, I'll say I pulled that trigger because I trusted you more than the book. She shook her head. That's not a story that helps you, Sergeant. Maybe not, he said. But it's the only one that feels true. He stood, fingertips drumming once on the table. Thank you, ma'am, he added, for breaking your own rule. Before she could answer, he turned and walked away, boots echoing softly until the door sighed shut behind him. Reyes sat for a moment longer, the muted TV flickering with images of people who would never know how close four unremarkable names had come to being carved into a wall. Eventually, she emptied the cold coffee into a trash can and left the mug in a gray bin. Outside, the night air hit her face with a dry, cooling shock. The Mount site lights glared against the dark, outlining blocky silhouettes of buildings built to be kicked in, cleared, and forgotten. As she walked toward the training lanes, she heard shouts and the pop of blank fire, a new class, running old drills. Somewhere in their curriculum, Connor was probably stapling her anonymous annex into a packet, calling it supplemental reading. At the edge of one lane, an instructor waved her over. Ma'am, we could use a role player if you're free, he said. Female detainee block. Script still the same. Of course it was. Reyes stepped into the narrow, familiar room and let them tape her hands, seat her in the chair, wrap a scarf around her hair. The plastic bit into her wrists. The fluorescent hum filled her ears. She tested the flex cuffs, feeling their give. When the door blew and the rifles came in, she lowered her head, eyes on the corner where a vent might be, in some other building, some other night. Under her breath, too low for the microphones. She whispered the line no one printed anymore. "Shoot her," she said. "If she moves,